Yo, what is up guys, it is FanFiction Reader here, and I want to say a big thank you to everyone who commented on the last video. I was absolutely blown away by the amount of comments I got on which next story to do, and I'll explain that at the end, but right now we are continuing with Avengers of Steel, Chapter 5, X marks the spot. So yeah, I'll talk about the next story will be at the end, but for now, enjoy. Avengers of Steel, Chapter 5, X marks the spot. So, what's your professional advice? We just stay here? Clark asked. Jessica rolled her eyes and went back to her surveillance. They were both on top of a building looking down on the movement of the people and the cars below, waiting for Dr. Okamura to finally get out from his clinic on the other side of the street. It's a stakeout, she answered. What were you expecting? Some Sherlock Holmes bullshit? Did you want me to just break into his clinic, lick some old wine stain from his lab coat and deduce, by taste and smell alone, that he's hiding the kidnapped people in some fucking wine cellar in Colombia? Clark sighed and waited because, unfortunately, by now, he knew she wasn't done. If Sherlock Holmes was realistic, there would be a lot less witty battles against Moriarty and a lot more of him and Watson watching people boning in dark alleys. She put her binoculars down. But then I suspect the target audience would be completely different. Lots and lots of sarcasm aside, Clark was glad Jessica decided to help him. She managed to find Dr. Okamura's clinic in a couple of hours with only his surname and a sketch of his face that he did on the spot. She could be foul-mouthed and probably an alcoholic as well, but she was also an excellent private investigator. Dr. Okamura's full name was Daniel Okamura, and he was a geneticist of relative renown. Among his published researches, the one that got the most attention was a study he did on mutants, or more accurately, a study he did on non-mutants that carried the so-called X gene. Clark hadn't read the whole thing, but the study went on how it was common knowledge that mutants carried the X gene, which was usually activated during puberty, resulting in the mutations or powers that the mutants had. What wasn't common knowledge, or at the very least what wasn't advertised, was the fact that some non-mutants could carry the X gene as well, without activating it their whole lives. That's how the X gene was passed on, sometimes skipping generations but always present in certain lineages. Dr. Okamura's thesis was a study of the possibility of the X gene being artificially activated, meaning turning a non-mutant that carried the X gene into a mutant without waiting for nature to do her thing further down the line. Apparently his thesis had received some attention, but no one wanted to really invest in it. The world wanted less mutants, not more, and since it was difficult to find willing subjects that wanted to risk injury and death to become the very beings that the majority of the world despised, the study didn't progress at all, really. Or at least it hadn't progressed legally. Clark had a good idea now of the kind of experiments that people were doing. So, are you one of them? Asked Jessica, suddenly interrupting his thoughts. You know, mutant. Because it's cool if you are, I don't judge. He looked at her. No, he was an alien. But Clark didn't really want to share that now. People had a tendency to freak out when they found out about that. More now, he imagines, after the whole alien invasion thing. No, he answered solely. I got my abilities after birth. It wasn't technically a lie. If he had remained on Krypton under a red sun, he would be a normal Kryptonian. Still an alien, yeah, but one without the so-called power. What about you? Clark asked, trying to shift the conversation from him, and, to be honest, he was legitimately curious. Accident, she said, and didn't elaborate. She turned the binoculars to the clinic's exit again. It's funny, isn't it? The way they talk about it on TV like the mutants are going to destroy the world. Fucking beasts of the apocalypse. Like they'll just, I don't know, teleport inside the White House and stab the president. And yet no one even saw one before. Clark considered her words for a second. Me neither. There aren't a lot of them, and they don't exactly advertise what they are. For good reason, I guess. And forgive me for the cliche, but people fear what they don't understand. Jessica clicked her tongue as if he had said something obvious. I know they do. And frankly, there are some mutant nut jobs out there who really are nightmare fuel. I mean, like that Magneto guy. But why the hell do governments all over the world lose their shit when they hear the word mutant? There are worse people out there, scarier people, that aren't mutants, and yet they don't give a two shits about them. Because they're an identifiable group, Clark theorized, having thought about this before. Easy to tell apart, easy to isolate, to make people fear. It doesn't have the same ring to say people should fear Jessica Jones or Clark Kent, as it does to say people should fear mutants. And there's also the fact that they are unpredictable. You can't know which people are going to be born mutants, where they will appear, what will their roles be, what will their loyalties be, what will be their abilities. I don't agree with it, obviously, but I can understand how governments may come to fear them, and how useful that fear is to some people. After a moment, considering Clark's word over a long, detailed explanation, Jessica just shrugged. Yeah, well, people are idiots, she concluded wisely. They spent some minutes in silence, just observing, and then she looked at him again. "So, how strong are you really?" she asked, as if she's been meaning to do this for a while. He looked at her, wary. "Why, do you want to hit me again?" he inquired, and she unconsciously touched her right hand. That was, to Clark's wonder, mostly healed by now. No, I learned my lesson just making conversation. Clark himself has wondered this many times. "I don't know," he finally said. "It's not like I can go to the gym and keep notes on how much I can bench press." "Okay, so what's the heaviest thing you've lifted then?" she questioned, opening her flask to take a swig. "I mean, I can lift a car. Can you?" "I lifted a tractor once," he said, then added, "when I was 3. Jessica choked in the middle of her swig. "What the? 3 years old?" "My father was fixing the tractor and I wanted to help. He looked uncomfortable under it, so I thought I could make it easier." "So you just went over and lifted the entire thing over your head?" "Well, not entirely the entire thing, but yeah, pretty much." "Fuck," she said, shaking her head. "Wait, but what about now? What is the heaviest thing you've ever lifted in your life?" Clark thought for a second. "An oil rig?" This time Jessica was shocked into silence. For a while at least. "Holy mother... How the fuck did you do that?" He hesitated for a second before explaining. "I was travelling for a while and needed money, so I ended up working on a fishing boat. Long story short, we were close to an oil rig that caught fire and they called for help. I swam there, took the people out, but before they could board the helicopter, the whole structure began to collapse in on itself. They wouldn't have time to get away, so I did the only thing I could. I held it for enough time for them to take off." Jessica was looking at him with clear disbelief etched into her face. "How did you get away?" she asked finally. "I didn't," Clark answered. "I held the entire oil rig up. It was the first time I've actually ever felt my muscles strain. But I held it until the helicopter got out. Problem was, the steel beam I was on started to bend because of the weight, and the whole thing came crashing down and exploded." She was experiencing difficulty to talk. "And you survived this shit?" "Jesus Christ, what kind of stubborn son of a bitch are you?" Clark sighed. She really did have a colourful vocabulary. "What else can you do?" she questioned, her entire attention on him now. "I mean, besides being able to lift oil rigs, surviving explosions, and running faster than a car." Well, this is going to be a long conversation, Clark thought to himself, since sometimes even he was surprised by the amount of things he could do, that the Kryptonian physiology allowed him to do. So he decided to shorten it. "I can fly." "Bullshit!" she retorted immediately. "No, I really can," he said, a little surprised by her fast reaction. "Really fly, or jump like really high and then fall down somewhat controlled, because I can do that too." "No, really fly." Though in the beginning it was more like jumping and falling. Pretty scary thing, I gotta say. Even knowing I wouldn't get hurt, it was still scary. He looked at her. "Maybe you can fly too and you just don't know how to do it yet. I could help." "No, thank you. The last thing I want to do is jump high enough to be able to die in landing. I'll keep my super strength and be happy with that." Clark rolled his eyes but didn't press. He too had been worried when he started trying in the Arctic, and he knew for a fact that he wouldn't get hurt, even if he landed on his head through a mountain. Despite the situation, he was enjoying this talk. The only people who ever listened to him talking about this were his parents. It was nice to have someone new, and that she had her own set of abilities made it even more gratifying. Even if he still was pretty weird compared to the rest of the world. There were some people out there who weren't completely normal too, and, well, he liked that. He opened his mouth to say something else when something caught his eyes. "There's our guy," he said, pointing it to the clinic. Jessica used her binoculars to confirm. "Yep," then she turned to face him. "Pretty good eyes you have there, huh?" Before Clark could answer, however, she got up. "Come on, we don't want to lose him." Every head in the Cassidy pub turned to look when Natasha entered. To be fair, Natasha turned heads everywhere she went, so it wasn't like the people of this pub were doing something unusual. They were just more open about it than people in other places. Without caring for any of this, Natasha walked to the balcony of the bar and sat down. The bar was full of people eating and drinking. There was a girl singing country music on a stage, and the sound of people talking was a little bit lower than her performance. Natasha looked at the bartender and asked for a beer, placing the bill on a counter. This was the bar that the alien she was looking for had worked at, before he got hired by Arctic Cargo. A common pub, exactly like hundreds of others full of ordinary people living ordinary lives, and yet she was absolutely sure that neither Thor nor Loki could have worked here and blended in, either because of pride or because of the lack of understanding of human culture. It was one thing that gave credence to her theory that this alien she was looking for has been living on Earth for a while. At least long enough to understand the basics of things that should be clear to any human. like serving food, taking orders, keeping a conversation about everyday topics like sports or politics. Thor might have looked human, but he was locked into a hospital hours after arriving on Earth, and even after he got out, he managed to appear on S.H.I.E.L.'s radar almost immediately. Certain things a person can learn only from experience. I mean, she was sure she would have had trouble blending in on Asgard, and she has been trained her entire life to be able to blend in anywhere. The waitress brought her beer and handed it to her with a smile. Black hair, dark eyes, pretty. So far, she was the only one there that fitted the poor description of the waitress that was groped and helped by the one she was looking for. Natasha smiled back. "Is it always this full?" she asked. "At this hour? Pretty much. Truckers stop by for lunch," she answered, while cleaning a nearby table. "You look short-staffed." The waitress snorted. "Tell me about it. We've been meaning to hire someone for months, but we only get temporary workers. We lost one of ours a while back to another place." "I know," Natasha answered, facing her. "Big guy, blue eyes, dark hair. Left to work for Arctic Cargo?" The waitress stopped in her tracks, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Who are you?" she asked. "Someone trying to help him," Natasha said in response. "Could we talk a little bit somewhere quieter?" The girl kept staring at Natasha with unfriendly eyes for a few seconds, then agreed. "Come with me." Natasha followed the girl to a back exit, where they were left to the cold wind of outside. Naturally, there was nobody there. "Okay," said the waitress, looking very determined. "Let's start over. Who are you, and what do you want with Clark?" "Clark? Another name? Could that be the real one?" she thought to herself. "I'm Natasha Romanoff. You might have heard of me from the Avengers," the girl said, suddenly looking awed and afraid at the same time. "I knew you looked familiar." Natasha smiled, trying to reassure the girl. "And what about you?" "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm Chrissy. I meant what I said. I'm trying to help Clark." Even she was surprised to notice that she really meant that. "Why? What happened to him?" Chrissy said, alarmed. "You know he went to work for Arctic Cargo, right? The army was digging something on Ellesmere Island, and they were hired to help with the transportation of their equipment. There was a theft. Important government property. They want it back." "No, Clark's a good guy. He would never steal something." Natasha put a hand on Chrissy's shoulder. "I believe you. I really do. But they ordered me to find him. If I don't, they'll find someone else, and this person will not be as convinced in Clark's innocence as I am. Help me, okay?" Chrissy was frightened and agitated, but she reluctantly agreed. "What do you need to know?" "His name. What is it?" "Clark Sullivan." "Clark Sullivan. Yet another name. Might be fake too." "How long did Clark work here?" "Not long, just a little over a month. He said he needed some cash after moving." "Do you know where he came from?" she questioned. "He said he came from Cordova, but I don't think he's actually from there. He is American though. I'm very certain of that." "Why'd you say that?" Despite being scared, Chrissy smiled. "We Canadians can always tell," she answered jokingly. "First, there was his accent. I couldn't place it, but I knew it was American. Then maybe the most important thing, hockey was not his favourite sport." Natasha gave a little smile in response. "What was it?" "Football. He was always watching it on his breaks. Said it reminded him of his dad and how they used to watch every game together." "How well did you know him?" Natasha asked. We were friends. Maybe we could have been more than friends if he stayed." She looked at Natasha. "He's a good man, Miss Romanoff. The kind of man you don't really see anymore. Always helping, no matter who needs it. Not because he wants something in return, but because he can. Please, just please remember that when you find him." "I will," she promised, allowing Chrissy to go back in. Natasha remained in place for a while, enjoying the cold. This was the first time she talked with someone who had a personal relationship with the one she was looking for. Clark, if the waitress was to be believed. What she learned here seemed to confirm what she theorized. Everyone said he was a good man, and his actions seemed to confirm that. That was nice. That didn't mean another Loki on their hands by the looks of it. And her newest theory, that this alien has been living on Earth for a long time, that was pretty much confirmed too. Not only had he had knowledge to work at a pub, but he spoke with an American accent, liked to watch football, and apparently had enough contacts and information on how to forge a fake identity. The comment about his father was also on Natasha's mind. Could it be another alien? An older one? Or a human he respected enough to call a father? Well, she hoped she would find out soon enough, since she had another lead to follow. Cordova, a small city in Alaska, if she wasn't mistaken, previous home of her elusive alien. It was a good thing she had a jet, otherwise she would take forever to get there. Clark and Jessica followed Dr. Okamura since he had left the clinic and got into his car. appreciating New York's traffic maybe for the first time, since it made it so much easier to catch up from the rooftops of the buildings and alleyways that they used for shortcuts. The doctor drove to a small warehouse with the Oscorp logo in it and disappeared inside, getting out only an hour later inside a small truck, probably a truck full of equipment he needed to improve his experiments. The truck stopped so he could get out and enter his own car, then continued to follow the doctor's car through the city. This time it was even easier to follow with him since the truck slowly moved and stood out. So there was no risk of losing it. Not that Clark's vision would lose it anyway. They drove for almost 2 hours, getting away from the crowded streets little by little until they arrived in a somewhat emptier neighbourhood, full of factories and warehouses close to the water. It was almost time for the sun to set when the two vehicles stopped in front of a tall fence, waiting for someone to open a gate for them. "Finally," Jessica whispered, as the vehicles entered and continued inside the factory, disappearing. I was beginning to think they wouldn't stop. "Tired?" Clark asked, curious about her stamina. "Just annoyed." She seemed to be telling the truth, which was weird because a human wouldn't have been able to do what she did without getting exhausted. Whatever happened to her, it not only made her strong and gave her rapid healing, but also augmented her stamina to superhuman levels. I'll need to ask her about that later. Turning his head, Clark looked at the factory Dr. Okamura had just entered. It looked very old, not functional at all. He couldn't tell exactly what it was used to make, but it probably had something to do with the chemical substances from the amount of metal barrels piled on outside. He looked at Jessica inside. He could already see that this was going to end very badly. "Before you asked me what I could do," he started. She didn't even look at him, her eyes still looking through the binoculars. "Yeah, what about it?" "Well, there's one thing I left out. You see, I have pretty good eyesight. I noticed," she deadpanned. Good. "But what I meant is that my eyes are so good that I can, see through things," he mumbled quickly. It took a few seconds for Jessica's brain to interpret what he said, but when it did, all movement halted. She lowered her binoculars slowly, turning her head to him, a very dangerous look on her face. "And what the fuck does that mean?" she deadpanned. "Well, it means that I have some sort of X-ray vision. I can see through solid objects, and but before you ask, if you look through my clothes, I will fucking scratch your eyes off." "I haven't looked through your clothes," he completed, apparently not fast enough. "Ma made sure to raise me as a gentleman. If I did something like this, she would... Well, actually, I don't know what she would do, but it wouldn't be nice, I can tell you that much. So no, I did not look through your clothes, or anyone else's, and you have my word I never will." She looked at him suspiciously for a second, then resumed her watch. Well, he didn't know if she believed him or not, but at least she didn't fight him right now. "So, I suppose you looked inside the place?" Jessica asked. "Because I'm hoping you brought up this new ability for a reason other than to let me know you could check out my tits anytime you wanted. What did you see?" Clark sighed, but didn't take the bait. "It's an old factory full of big machines that seems to be collecting dust and metal barrels piled over. There are some catwalks over the machines, looks abandoned, at least the part with the machinery. No cameras anywhere. There are other rooms further back with people, and I count 13 armed men. Pistols, rifles, both," he clarified. "What is interesting, however, are the lower levels. There's one elevator that goes there, accessed by one hallway, but things look new down there. It looks like it's been built not too long ago, unlike the rest of the factory. I can see some stretchers down there and some medical equipment. The people we are looking for are probably there. Probably, because he couldn't see clearly to know for certain. The place was underground, covered in metal and most likely surrounded by lead from old factory parts. He could see through solid objects, but certain kinds of objects were harder to see through than others." "Well, no time like the present," Jessica said, getting up only to be stopped by Clark. He looked at her. "Maybe I should go in alone. I mean, I can survive being shot if you can't." She looked surprised at him for a moment. "You're bulletproof?" I just told you how I survived an explosion on my face. Why wouldn't I be bulletproof?" "Shit, I don't know, you just surprised me," she answered before slapping his hand away. "And fuck that, I'm going. No way in hell I'm staying outside after all this running around." Clark reluctantly nodded and got up as well. They ran all the way to the fence and tore the wire to go through. They didn't need tools to do it, they simply used their hands, as if they were breaking an annoying spider's web. Clark had made sure that nobody was there at first, but his first instinct was to look around as they ran through the factory. Even if they could, they didn't enter through the main door, choosing to bend the bars and go through a nearby window and jump in. As Clark told Jessica, there was nobody in the machinery room, There were a few lights on, giving a creepy vibe on the dark place as they walked through the corridors full of dust. It was more than clear that the place was abandoned, or at least that part was. Moving on through the old and big machinery room, they arrived at a closed door. It wouldn't be anything unusual, except that this door wasn't old at all. It stood out in the decrepit room as the only thing that was new. Bright steel and glowing lights on the keyboard. "Great, it's locked," complained Jessica. Clark ignored her for a while, looking at the keyboard. She definitely couldn't see, but with his eyes he could make out the fingerprints quite clearly. He just needs to know the combination of numbers that had the marks on them. "I can see which numbers were used, but I'm going to need to try the combination," Clark explained before pressing a few numbers. An unsatisfactory noise made itself heard and he tried again. Jessica rolled her eyes. "Just let me," she said, pushing him aside. But instead of pushing the buttons on the keyboard, as he thought she would, she punched the door. Her fist made a huge dent on the steel and she grabbed it with both hands, forcing the door open with a grunt. "See?" she smiled. Wow, I have no words. Really great job. Clark congratulated, sarcasm dripping from his voice, a hand on his face, and a small blush spreading through Jessica's. "Okay, that one's on me," she admitted unnecessarily. Without losing any more time, they ran through the door, arriving on another room. Like the previous one, it was also full of machinery, but these looked new. There was lighting here and the noise of the machines made showed them that these were functioning. Aside from the catwalks over them and the doors upstairs, the room looked like only one corridor. Right in front of them on the other side of the room, and at the end of it, the elevator that Clark saw would take them down. There was also 3 men on that corridor holding their rifles in their direction. They dashed behind the big machine as the bullets flew right by where they were a few seconds ago. Jessica looked around searching for something. Without saying a thing, she extended her hand and reached for one of the metal barrels around them, and with an incredible accuracy, she threw it at the men. The barrel bounced on the ground and kept rolling fast, hitting the men on their legs, throwing them up into the air with a violence. They fell back like rocks and didn't stand up again. "Ha!" she cheered, just as Clark noticed the movement upstairs. If the men managed to get to the catwalks, there would be nowhere to hide from the bullets anymore. It wasn't much of a problem to Clark, but Jessica couldn't say the same. So, taking a page from her book, he grabbed a barrel and threw it. Except he did it against an object, so there was no reason to hold back. The barrel was filled with something, and because of that it was extremely heavy, so when Clark tossed it, it moved like a damn cannonball. Hitting the catwalk on the spot it connected to the room upstairs, the steel from the catwalk simply ripped away from it, creating a huge hole and preventing anyone from crossing it. At least for now. The noise of the barrel colliding against the wall was absolutely deafening. "Show off," Jessica simply said, looking forward. They both got up and started to go towards the corridor of the elevator, the alarm blaring non-stop and they could hear people yelling. That's when there was a bell noise, indicating that the elevator had arrived on their floor. They watched as the doors opened and a woman got out. The same woman Clark saw last night, breaking that man's neck. She stopped walking and looked at them. The woman, Angel if Clark recalled, was tall. She had a short black haircut and a very fit physique. Like on the night before, she had a match held on her lips. Without saying anything, almost looking bored, Angel looked around, her eyes stopping at the smashed barrel Jessica had thrown. Very slowly, she walked to it, picked it up, and Jessica's eyebrows rose. And then she threw it back at them. Like when Clark did, she put the full force of her strength into it. The thing was barely visible as it crossed the room, splitting the air. By pure reflex, Clark and Jessica stepped to the side, letting the barrel pass in the middle of them, exploding on the wall behind them with extraordinary force. "Holy hell!" exclaimed Jessica, eyes wide. Angel walked calmly through the corridor until she arrived at the room with the machines, and without looking back she punched the button on the wall. The door sealed behind her, isolating the elevator. Jessica looked at him. "Go. I'll deal with this bitch," she said, as Angel continued to walk towards them. "Are you sure? I saw her kill a man last night. She is dangerous," said Clark, looking at the door closely. "So am I." Clark nodded, still worried, but started to walk towards the elevator and towards Angel. He would trust Jessica. "You're not going anywhere," stated Angel, almost looking bored. He didn't answer, he just kept walking towards her, without any hesitation. She frowned and raised her fist and punched him. Except she didn't hit anything but air. Looking surprised for the first time, Angel looked around, trying to find Clark, only to see him entering the elevator on the far end of the corridor without even acknowledging her. Baring her teeth, Angel turned around ready to go after him. That's when Jessica's fist collided with the side of her head, throwing her like a rag doll against a pile of barrels. Oh, it was on. It wasn't every day that Jessica could really use her strength. Even when she tried to be a superhero convinced by her sister, her only opponents were street thugs, and she couldn't exactly go all out against them. Not without killing people in horrific ways with her bare hands. This woman, though, she could take a punch. A real one, to the side of the head and get up with barely a scratch. She got up from the pile of barrels like an enraged bull, throwing barrels everywhere as she ran into Jessica, her head smashing against her stomach, pushing her back. Jessica lost her breath for a second, trying to keep herself on her feet while the woman pushed her. She brought her fists to the bitch's liver, punching with all her strength, feeling her muscles hardening like a brick wall. She didn't even flinch. Without being able to stop, Jessica braced herself for a moment before colliding with the wall, cracking it. She couldn't remember the last time she hit something this hard. Without losing any time, the woman started to punch her non-stop. She felt for the first time what boxers felt like when they were backed into a corner. Each punch she took threw her against the wall, cracking it further. She was beginning to get dizzy, the storm of hits giving her no time to think. In a boxing match she would be dead in the water, but luckily for her, she never cared about the rules. Holding the woman's arm with her own, Jessica headbutted her in the face, throwing her to the ground. Without waiting for her to catch her breath, she kicked her in the stomach and then punched her, only to see her hand break into the ground as the woman dodged, and moved her legs to drop Jessica to the ground herself. She felt her throat tighten when the woman grabbed her in a chokehold. She elbowed her and tried to get away, but she just wouldn't budge. "That's it. Keep fighting," the woman whispered in her ear. "It won't make a difference. You're already mine." Jessica, of course, fought even harder. "When you pass out, we're gonna fit you with a control collar. The things I'm gonna make you do." Her vision began to blacken. Suddenly, Jessica wasn't in the olfactory anymore fighting the woman. She was in the middle of a street walking away as a man yelled at her. She opened her eyes with a jolt. "No!" she yelled, strength flowing through her muscles. Her legs tensed against the ground, cracking it as she pushed with all her strength, jumping. She and the woman were thrown into the air, colliding with the wall, the bricks breaking apart on impact. And then she was free once again. Without a care about her wounds, Jessica got her up and punched the woman in the face so strong that her head went back against the wall and broke it. And then she punched again, and again, and again, her hands turning into blurs of unleashed fury. "Never again! Never!" she yelled over and over, the woman beginning to disappear into the brick wall. Jessica didn't care. The person she was hitting wasn't exactly there anyway. Going back one step, she prepared all the muscle on her body, lifted her fist, and gave one last devastating punch against her face. Her head embedded in the wall. "Take this, you bitch!" she spat. She got away from the woman, breathing hard, tired as hell, but feeling a thrill like she hasn't felt in so long. That's when she heard the rifles being aimed at her from the catwalk upstairs. The elevator's doors barely opened, and when Clark was already out, he could hear the sounds of fighting upstairs, the room shaking at times, but he ignored that and looked forward. What he saw took the words out of his mouth. It wasn't a lab, it was an infirmary. What he saw down there can only be described as a torture room. There were electrified racks with shackles on it, plastic containers filled with melting ice, big enough to fit a person, chains on the ceiling where people could be lifted like punching bags, little cages right by the side of hoses, presumably so prisoners could be soaked with freezing water, bathtubs filled with filthy water to drown people. Clark couldn't believe what he was seeing. He knew these people were performing experiments on people, but that was beyond anything he could have imagined. Forcing himself, he looked around, looking at the people cuffed to the stretchers, barely conscious. He walked forward towards the first one, a man who was on some kind of IV fluid attached to his arm. The man looked at him with terror and closed his eyes as soon as he got close. "Please, please, just kill me." There were no words to describe how lost Clark was at the moment. That's when he heard the click of a gun behind him. "Stop right there." He recognized the voice belonged to Dr. Okamura, pointing a gun at his back. "Don't move." Clark didn't move, but not because he was being ordered to. "Turn around." Very slowly. "Were you the one who did this?" Clark interrupted, his voice tense even to his own ears. "Were you the one who tortured these people?" Dr. Okamura was so surprised to be cut off that he didn't answer for a second. "Tortured? Oh, no. I have more important things to do with my time. Now, turn around." "But you knew about this, didn't you?" Clark stated. "Of course I knew. It's part of the treatment. Nothing raises the adrenaline like pain." "Why?" "What do you mean, why? Without stimuli, the X gene wouldn't activate. Not even with the serum." "You're making mutants? I'm making the future, he corrected. Back in World War II, the making of one super soldier was what turned the tide of the war. The making of Captain America shaped the century. What I'm doing here will as well. Your future will be inside a prison cell. Do you think anyone cares about what happens here? Armies all over the world will pay fortunes for one single mutant created in this workshop. Normal people like you and me. Well, we only have one place on the battlefield as cannon fodder now. Captain America saw to that. The Avengers saw to that. You need extraordinary weapons to fight extraordinary weapons. Does this government know? They don't know because they know better than to ask questions. There are people on key positions inside the army and the government that make sure that stays that way. And why would they care anyway? They made things worse. They've made far worse things. Clark didn't say anything for a few seconds. These people? Will they live? Maybe. I don't know. It depends on how they react to the serum. And it depends if they have a dormant X gene too. It doesn't matter. There's always more subjects. He pointed the gun at Clark more assertively. Now, shut up and turn up. Before he could even finish what he was about to say, Clark was already in front of him, his hand crushing the pistol alongside the doctor's bones. Dr. Okamura screamed, helpless, only to be grabbed by the back of the head and dragged next to the man who was on the stretcher. He is not a subject, Clark yelled, forcing Dr. Okamura to look at the man. He is not an experiment, he is a person. You're one of them! God, you're one of them! Dr. Okamura screeched, more afraid than he ever was in his life. You're a freak! No, I am much more than that, Dr. Okamura. He lifted the doctor in the air. Now, tell me the names of the people in charge, or I'm going to hold you responsible for everything. I don't know. Now! My notebook! It has the emails, the documents, the transactions. Just let me go. Clark did let him go, with his strength against the ground, and the doctor stayed down, unconscious, forcing himself to calm down despite everything he had just learned. Clark concentrated his hearing to see how Jessica was doing. The sounds of the fight had stopped and he could see Jessica's breathing pattern and heart rate. He could also listen to the heartbeat of 10 men as well, probably holding rifles by the sounds of it. Turning around, Clark looked up. It would take too long to take the elevator again and breaking the steel door that had been sealed in the corridor. He needed to be a little more direct. He kneeled down, focusing all of his energy. The small objects, the little specks of dust and rock around him began to float. He contracted his muscles, preparing himself to fly. And then he took off. Jessica didn't know what the fuck just hit the building, but it felt like an atomic bomb had just fallen on top of them. The entire factory trembled. She and everything else in the room began to fall to the ground. All the lights turned off, replaced by the red glow of the emergency ones. The machine stopped working and the only sound was the alarm blaring and the sound of metal bending. The steel door that sealed the corridor to the elevator began to fold itself, as if something was forcing it open. The armed men on top of the catwalk got up, their hands shaking with fear as they tried to see what was behind the door. And a pair of red eyes ignited in the dark. "Open fire!" yelled one man. Before they could fire, however, the pair of energy beams crossed the room, melting the steel support catwalks, and the entire thing came crashing down, the armed men tumbling to the ground. And there he was, already on them, and he appeared out of nothing. Jessica could only watch as the dark figure moved under the red light of the room. Clark picked up one of the men from the ground as he tried to stand up, lifting him up in front of him as if he didn't weigh anything, and then dashed to the front. Using the men he lifted up as a human shield, he bashed his shield against one of the men, throwing them to the other side of the room. Without even looking, he punched the man by the side, sending him down, before using the men he was holding to hit another man. 3 thugs managed to get up and point rifles at him, but Clark simply tossed the man he was holding on them, knocking down all 4 of them in a tangle of limbs. One of the armed men appeared from the other side of the collapsed catwalk and managed to shoot. Jessica was baffled as she saw Clark simply move his hand across the air and slap the bullet to the side, deflecting it directly to the leg of an approaching enemy. The man fell down, screaming, only to be picked up and launched against the shooter. The only man left standing didn't even try to fight. He simply discarded his rifle and began walking backwards, exactly like someone unarmed would do when faced by an approaching tiger. The man was so damn scared that I didn't even notice he was walking right in her direction. That was a little assaulting. So she bitch-slapped him into the ground. Jessica looked at Clark, her jaw dropped. When she managed, she said, "So, I guess you forgot to tell me about a few of your abilities, huh?" As soon as Clark was certain Jessica was alright, much to her very verbal displeasure, both of them got back into the lab torture room. He still couldn't manage to stop flinching every time he saw one of the things that were down there. Apparently, he wasn't the only one bothered by it. What the fuck? What did those sick sons of bitches do here? She explained, disgust expressions on her face. They were trying to create mutants out of non-mutants, Clark said, looking around for Dr. Okamura's notebook. Do you remember the doctor's thesis about activating the dormant X gene? But why the medieval torture room, Jessica demanded, still unable to look away. To raise the adrenaline, make the serum work. I'm guessing they didn't really care that the mortality rate wasn't low, he added, somber. Finally finding the computer, Clark started to look at everything regarding the experiments in it. To a human, that would take days, but Clark's eyesight, memory, and rapid thinking process made it take a lot less. All he had to do was glance at the documents rolling as fast as he could, and everything would be safely committed to his mind. Jessica, start taking pictures. What? Why? She turned to him, shocked. I need evidence for my story, he said without looking at her. Though he did have to look at her when she grabbed him. Are you fucking kidding me? There are people dying here and you're worried about a fucking story? She yelled at him. Clark grabbed her and pushed her to the front of the computer, at the end of his patience after everything he witnessed today. Look at this, he deadpanned. She tried to move, but she couldn't escape his grip. Look at it. Do you see the names? Do you see where they work? They are powerful people involved in this, turning a blind eye to everything happening here. If we call the police without finding proof first, all of this will go away. It will be like it never happened. Only the dead will remain dead, and the people that did this will keep on killing, and everything will remain the same. And Jessica looked at him. So maybe surprised to see him sounding serious for once. We need to reveal everything that happened here, Jess. Otherwise, it won't stop. So please, help me. Silence. Jessica took a moment before nodding, taking her cell phone and began taking a lot of pictures. What are you going to do? She asked. Clark didn't answer for a second. I'm going to read everything as fast as I can, and then I'm going to beat my own record of the most quickly written story in the world. She turned to him. You've got to be shitting me. Are you writing this now? Only chance we'll have, he explained. The moment we call the authorities, they'll take everything and we are done. The people here aren't exactly alright, but they aren't in risk of dying. They can wait an hour. Saying this, Clark began to type his story and Jessica took pictures, his fingers moving as fast as the computer allowed. Taking his cell phone from his pocket, he dialed the number, while typing one-handed still, his hand almost a blur. Mr. Elson? Clark Kent. Sorry to bother you now, but I do have a story, and it's a big one. Okay guys, and that was the end of Chapter 5 of Avengers of Steel. I hope you've all enjoyed it very much. Now, there is one thing I wanted to clear up before I end this. And when I said last video about the different stories that I could do next, like Harry Potter Squatter, Last King, Last Soldier of Krypton, I may have forgotten to mention a couple of things. Number one is to all those who sent comments about what stories I could do that weren't in those options. Thank you so much for the support and the ideas. It really helps out. But I need to let you know, I can't just start randomly doing videos on these stories. I need to get in contact with the writers of each of these stories and ask for permission to do this. Because honestly, I would just feel like a cunt if I didn't ask permission first. And of course, being granted permission. It's a very useful thing to have. So if you do give me an idea for a story later down the line, just keep that in mind. I need to ask permission and I need to get granted permission. So I'm leaving the votes open. It's still, so far, The Last Soldier of Krypton is winning. But based on the votes I've gotten last time on the brand new stories that I didn't put in, I'm going to be adding a few more to the list. How the voting process will work exactly? Well, there are a couple of ways to do that, but right now I'm just going to leave a comment in the video and I'm going to list the different ideas and you guys can reply to that comment of what you want and I'll keep counted. Yeah? Simple enough. I know there's other ways to do it, but right now I'm just coming up with the simplest way so everyone can get it. So yeah, hopefully sometime this week I'll have a new chapter for a brand new story. It's been FanFic Reader here. If you want to read anything else, let me know in the comments down below. Please like, subscribe, and I'll see you later.